Greetings once again, Palmer High World students. We're in the second half of 12.2. We're going to talk a little bit about Renaissance art. As you can see here, I'll get my face out of the way so you can see Mr. Fluffy here. Lots of cool things going on with Renaissance art. Lots of color, lots more detail, and a lot more going on. Like when you look at this picture of the manger scene, you don't just have Mary, Joseph, and baby. You've got angels dancing here. You've got the heavenly host above. You've got some, I don't know if they're hugging it out or slow dancing or whatever they're doing down here, but there's a lot going on. It makes the picture much more interesting to look at. Like this picture here, got an angel hanging out with some lady, probably reading out of the Bible here. You've got the rays of light coming through with a dove, signifying her purity. The detail on the robe, detail in the floor, even the pillow, the stained glass. So a lot going on. It makes a picture much more valuable. Uh, in an era before any sort of electronics or even books were widely spread um, and very expensive at the time. If you bought a picture, you wouldn't want just one central character like the bunny here. You want lots more to look at, things you could discover over time to make the picture more interesting. Fluffy here is pretty interesting too in the immense amount of detail. Notice he's not just a perfect rendition of a bunny, but more like a real bunny. Not perfect, ears aren't straight, a little notch out of the ear here, random claws. Makes it more believable. Um, the three major players of the High Renaissance era: Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo. I'll give you a little more information on each one of those. Here's your time period, right at the turn of the century into the 1500s. Here's Raphael, uh, one of Italy's best pictures during the era, painters, excuse me. Famous for painting Madonnas. The word Madonna just simply refers to any picture of the Virgin Mary. Here you have the lovely Virgin. And once again, trying to not show beauty as perfection, but beauty as real and natural as it can be, like the fat baby Jesus here with his cankles and whatnot. Apparently, Jesus was a genius. He's already reading. Here, this is a picture Raphael painted. It's supposed to be of Mary and Joseph getting married. Apparently, they did get married after the whole virgin birth thing. But again, more going on in the picture than just the marriage here. Immense amount of detail in all of the clothing. But also, you've got like a beggar back here about to take a beat down, I think. Some sort of dark, nefarious character over here hanging out in the shadows. I'm assuming this is part of the ritual. In 10 years of using this picture, I've never been able to figure out like why this guy is breaking a twig over his knee. Maybe it has something to do with like the old Jewish tradition of stomping on a glass when they get married, but again, I haven't been able to figure that out. Another major contender who we'll talk about quite a bit in this unit, the lovely Leonardo da Vinci. Master of realistic paintings like the Vitruvian Man here. He was trying to prove that man is symmetrical, legs same size, arms same size. We, of course, know that doesn't work anymore. I myself have one leg that's just slightly shorter than the other. Lots of people do. One thing he did do was dissect bodies in a time when the church was saying not to do it. So here he's got a picture of a baby in the womb. Doesn't take a lot of imagination to figure out how he came up with such an accurate drawing. He did dissect bodies, so presumably a woman who had died who was pregnant to get these pictures. Also, you'll notice that a lot of the writing is backwards. Leonardo da Vinci was such a genius that he could write backwards or in mirror image without thinking about it. Why he decided to do that, I couldn't really tell you. There's lots of theories that maybe he was trying to hide his work. Uh, but another eccentricity of an artist. He did go beyond realism. Just he wanted such immense beauty in reality. The idealized forms of the things that he draw, like the Vitruvian Man. One of his most famous paintings, of course, The Last Supper. Uh, some people theorize that this isn't an apostle, but is a woman. Other people like to theorize about this finger that seems to be pointing up right here, that it's a mistake, that it couldn't be any of the arms. If you count all the arms in the painting, it's not this guy's. It would have to be his right hand turned up in front of his face, and some people say that that's like the only error in the picture. My personal favorite is Michelangelo. This statue you're looking at is called the Pieta. It's a statue from the biblical story of Jesus being taken off the cross and given to his mother. But the amount of detail in the entire picture makes it very, very beautiful as far as showing the rib cage, the suffering of both the characters. He was a painter, a sculptor, an architect. He painted the Sistine Chapel, which I'm going to show you lots of pictures of here in a minute. If you do take notes, remember that Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. It is not the 16th chapel. There are not 15 others. Um, as I've mentioned, the Pieta, this sits at the St. Peter's Basilica. I actually took this picture. Um, Michelangelo also created a huge statue of David from the David and Goliath story. And again, the Sistine Chapel. So there's a picture of David. I'm going to show you a whole bunch more here in just a moment. And of course, the Sistine Chapel, where the ceiling is painted with lots of famous art. The first here being the creation of Adam, where supposedly God is zapping to life Adam after creating him. And then another famous panel is what they call the fall or expulsion from paradise. This is the Adam and Eve story where she takes the apple from a serpent and then they get thrown out of the Garden of Eden. So the entire ceiling is covered with these pictures from different stories from the Bible. It is awesome. I did not take these pictures. They do not allow you to take pictures in there. So the Catholic Church has taken pictures, but when you're in there, you're not allowed to talk and you're not allowed to take pictures, which is okay because no matter how good you think your camera is, you're probably not going to take as good of pictures as you can just simply find on the internet. So this is what it looks like when you're standing in there. Pictures from the Old Testament, New Testament, also different stories from Jerusalem along the walls, different kings uh, of the Old Testament. On the back wall, you have a very famous picture called The Last Judgment, which we will talk about in just a moment. If you give me a moment, I want to pull up some pictures here. Again, as I said, Michelangelo is my favorite. So here is the statue of David. The statue of David is quite large. You can see people standing here. I did take some of these pictures. It was first intended to be on top of a building so that, and the detail needed to be so large and so perfect that somebody staring up at this, standing on top of a building, could still see all of the features. That's one reason why the hand and the head and the feet are so large, is so that people can see those features from far away. When you zoom in on the face, this is David who fought David and Goliath, so David who fought the giant. Um, you can see the stress and the furrowing of the brow as he's facing off with the giant, um, the nostril flare, the intent eyes, um, the detail in the ears and the neck. You can even see his Adam's apple. And these are not just marks in the rock, these are veins popping out of his neck. So trying to show that he's very, very intense in this moment. The strap over the back is what he would have flung the rock with. You can see the rock in his hand. Um, all of the muscles and the tension in the back. It is said that absolutely every muscle that can be counted on a human from the outside can be counted in this particular statue. So every muscle is there. It is perfect except for this little divot right here. And they're not sure why it is there. They don't know if maybe there was a flaw in the rock or if a chip came out that shouldn't have. But this is the only imperfection in the entire statue. And they have put a glass barrier around David. Again, this is one of my photos um, because somebody tried to attack it with a hammer. And I'll show you the feet where they caused damage here in just a moment. Uh, as I've said before, the intent picture showing the tension across the bridge of his nose, the detail. The other thing is this rock is not different colors. It is all the same white, and it's the perfect use of shadows, even in the veins of his hands, creating shadows so that you can see them. If the shadow wasn't used just perfectly, then you wouldn't be able to see all these features because they'd just be washed out in white. It'd be like looking at a snowy field. Um, so it's that usage of shadow that makes it so great. Even in the fingernails and the ridges that are perfect, the creases in the knuckles. The man was a genius at what he did. As I said, somebody attacked this thing with a hammer. Back in, I believe, the 1990s. So that's why they've got the big glass wall going around it now, is so that people can't damage it. Before I get to that image, one thing I will say is that the Pope who commissioned and paid for this was the kind of guy who always liked to be correct. So there's a story of him seeing the statue and saying that it was so amazing, but saying that there was one flaw in that he said Michelangelo's nose was too big. So it is said that Michelangelo climbed up on a ladder with a chisel um, and took a little bit of dust off of his shoulder, off of the shoulder of the statue, and then took his chisel and pretended to tap at the nose a little bit, and in doing so, dropped that dust out of his hand, and then went back down the ladder and asked the Pope if it was good now, and the Pope then said, "Now it's perfect." Um, just the kind of jerk who likes to always be right. Michelangelo was basically forced by that same Pope to paint the Sistine Chapel. He didn't want to do it. He told him he's a sculptor, not a painter. And Michelangelo was basically forced by the Pope to do it anyways. So the back wall of the chapel has the final judgment, which is supposed to be the time that Jesus comes and sorts out the good and the evil. Some will be sent down to hell, others will get to go on into heaven. I want to zoom in here just a little bit. In the middle here, you have Jesus along with Mary sorting out all of the good and the bad. And what you'll see on all these people are random clothes that aren't the same color of the rest of the painting and really don't fit, like the covering of the legs here, the covering of Jesus's junk here. This man has a cover just right over his genitalia. This man, this man, this man. You notice all around there's these random cloths covering up dudes' junk. Some of the women are still bare-breasted, but lots of random cloths covering up the dudes' genitalia. Michelangelo did not cover up any of these people. They were all nude. These butts would have all been nude when he originally painted it. But as you move forward past the Renaissance, Europe and the Catholics really become kind of prudish and anti-nudity. So somebody came along much later and was paid to cover all that up. One guy who didn't want the nudity, well, before I get to that, I'll talk about this skin right here. You'll notice this skin has a face that kind of looks familiar. And this is the face of Michelangelo. He actually painted himself into the picture because he wanted to be sorted out on whether or not he's going to heaven or hell, but he didn't want the sin or of the hubris of sending himself to heaven, nor did he want to send himself down here to hell. So he just put his skin in this guy's hand, and this guy's kind of looking up at Jesus like, what do you want me to do with this one? And Jesus is kind of looking down, like making his call, but that call hasn't been made yet. Another thing I will mention is this dude all the way down here. You've got Chiron. He's the guy who ushers the souls across the river Styx from ancient Greek and Roman mythology. But when you get all the way down to the corner, you have this very famous face right here. Okay, this is a gentleman who was the masters of ceremonies for all the masses and all the procedures done within the Vatican. So he was a very important cardinal, and he didn't like the fact that all these dudes had their junk hanging out. Okay, he was kind of a prude. He didn't want these butts, again, that later got covered up. He didn't want all that in a church with all these dudes with their junk hanging out. So he went to the Pope and asked the Pope to have Michelangelo cover him up. And the Pope basically said, I am not an artist, and I will not tell another artist what to do. So he kind of wouldn't touch it. Michelangelo got word that this cardinal was trying to have his uh, painting changed. So Michelangelo made him the first guy being drugged to hell. So it is basically the most famous telling of somebody to go to hell like ever. On top of that, you'll notice there's a snake winding around this guy, and notice right where that snake is biting. So basically, Michelangelo is also saying like, "Oh, you don't want people's junk shown? I will cover yours up by having it eaten by a snake on your way to hell." So kind of a fun little anecdote there in the corner of the picture of the Sistine Chapel. Anyways, Renaissance art, it's not always boring. There it is. I will leave you with that. As I said, this is the end of the lecture for this week. You have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to watch these two parts. From there, finish the vocabulary, get her turned in by Monday, and you're good to go. Have yourselves a fabulous weekend.